This identification is on the terrorist attack on the United States on September 11th, 2001. So just a brief introduction. This attack occurred just after the end of President Bill Clinton's his term had come to an end, his 8 years. And here you see Clinton, who had ended his term uneventfully and with a fairly stable economy in 2001. Here you see him signing the NAFTA agreement with Mexico and Canada, which was a trade agreement which set up a trade bloc between the three countries, which many economists think helped with the economy and with free trade in general. And he did it. This one problem he had was the scandal with Monica Lewinsky, in which he was impeached, but he was found not guilty in a Senate trial. But generally, no one really saw a major event coming at the end of Clinton's term. And when his term ended, a new president was to take office. Okay, so the new president was George Bush Jr., and he won in a very close election. As you can see, it says too close. It was that close up against Al Gore. Actually, it was a difference of 200 votes. So in Florida, and if Gore would have won Florida, he would have won the presidency. So this election came down to, actually after the recount, about 150 votes. So 75 people had voted differently. There would have been a different president. But Bush was inaugurated as the president, and then the big attack happened about 8 months after his inauguration. So, like I was saying, there were some other terrorist attacks before 9/11, quite a few, but a few important ones was the attack on the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983, in which 220 Marines were killed. That was a terrorist attack in the Middle East. There was the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, tied to the dictatorship and terrorists from Beirut. And this was the worst terror attack in the history of the United Kingdom, with a loss of 270 people. There was the hijacking of TWA Flight 847, and that flight from Athens, Greece, was a very dramatic, publicized hijacking. Later films were made about this flight. It's like Delta Force, and so that was another of a number of things that occurred in the 80s and 90s leading up to 9/11. Here you see the first, now this one was directly the same building of September 11th. This was the first attack on the Trade Center, which really a lot of people don't know about. But in 1993, there was a terrorist attack on the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center before the huge attack in 2001. And this one was a terrorist attack by placing bombs in the basement. It did end up killing 6 people. The 1993 bombing attack on the World Trade Center. You can see that this is still 8 years before the big attack. Another shot, smoke from the 1993 attempt by Al-Qaeda operative Ramzi Youssef, who had bombed also a Philippine airline flight 434. But this attack killed 6 people but failed to destroy the building. But the attack that we're covering here in this identification is the September 11th attack, September 11th, 2001, when 2 747 planes were hijacked and flown into the buildings. the LA Times, among every paper in the country, um, showed this attack. It was the biggest thing that had happened in many ways. Certainly the biggest attack on civilians in United States history. So this is the fire from the two gigantic fuel-filled, full tank fuel, full fuel tanks flown in at a high rate of speed into these buildings. One plane into each building, destroying these buildings and then causing the collapse of the buildings. Again, you see here on the New York Times, U.S. attack. The hijacked jets destroy the Twin Towers, which were the tallest buildings in the United States, and both of them were destroyed. It was absolute bedlam and chaos. I'm sure you've seen other pictures of people fleeing, and there's so many pictures of this. Where the buildings are now obviously completely gone in New York. If you go there, you'll just see there's two large lights in the place of it, and so these two airliners destroyed it and the Al Qaeda terrorist group led by Osama bin Laden were responsible. And then the third plane crashed into the Pentagon, the military center of the United States for military leaders and generals. So crashed into that building, killing more people, but obviously not destroying the building, but part of the building. Partially because it's not a high rise; it's a large white building, but it created quite a bit of damage. That was the third hijacked plane, and the fourth hijacked plane was Flight 93, which was also forcibly hijacked by the Al Qaeda terrorists. And this plane is believed was headed towards Chicago, but halfway through, the terrorists ordered the pilot to turn the plane around and head back. And it's believed either to Washington, D.C., to head into the Congress building. But this particular group of terrorists was confused about really where to attack, and it's not quite sure what buildings they were going to crash into. But what changed this was that the passengers heard on their radios and on their cell phones all about what the other three planes had done. So the passengers decided to storm the cockpit because they knew they were likely going to die, so they wanted to storm the cockpit and overpower the terrorists so that it wouldn't crash into another building. So they really did it to save people. A few films were made on Flight 93, another one, United 93. And this is the picture of the crew and the passengers of Flight 93, who did storm the cockpit, but then, and there was some recordings of that attempt, but then the hijackers the plane crashed into a field. And one of the last things on recording was Todd Beamer yelling, "Let's roll," when they stormed the cockpit. So in New York, we're in New York again. This is George Bush, and Bush was at the site of the destroyed buildings, supporting firemen and first responders. The fire department lost, and the police department lost many people. So there were multiple funerals. So there were a total of 343 fire department personnel that died, and 60 police, though many have died since then from smoke and cancer-related uh, issues. So after 9/11, and there were 3,000 total lost people in this attack. And after um, September 11th, there was some loss of civil liberties in the United States, mostly due to highly increased security. So you had long lines in airports, like you see in this picture, um, uh, scanning and sporting events and things that are still have been going on really all this time, although obviously not now during the pandemic, but the long lines at the airports and concerts really started at this time due to security checks. And also military involvement in other countries in the Middle East began with the United States in the Iraq War, and then later in Afghanistan, and entrenchment in the Middle East began in what has been called the War on Terror. So it had a great effect on foreign policy, and problems resulted. Um, and this war on terror continued. And then in 2008, Barack Obama became president. And right at the end of your textbook, you'll see some information on that. Um, so yeah, Barack Obama became president, but the war on terror was still going on when he was president. So yeah, here's a shot of Barack Obama winning right after he won in 2008, and he made some decisions which many people think helped the economy. And one of the biggest decisions he made was to help the struggling auto industry. So he was very interested in domestic issues too, in addition to the war on terror. But he was still very concerned with terrorism. But he's certainly given much credit for helping to save the auto industry, and was very popular in states where automobiles were manufactured. In 2011, President Obama approved the attack on the Al Qaeda base where their leader was hiding out, and it was a successful raid. And then naturally, the newspapers covered it, and Obama, who had been very closely following this, announced it to the general public. Ultimately, the raid damaged Al Qaeda as a terrorist group, though it does still exist. This is an aircraft carrier called the USS Carl Vinson that was involved in the operation, as well as Navy SEAL Team 6. This helicopter would be off of the USS Vinson. Ultimately, 9/11 is the largest terrorist attack in U.S. history.